Welcome to the space where we're exploring a vision for how to live well in the things we can't help but face. I'm Jason Jensen, and I'm here with my buddy Pete. Okay, we are here today starting a series on work and a discernment and an exploration of what that means and how to enter into it in better ways, how to inhabit more peace as we go about work, seeing as it's so much of our days that we end up being in work or thinking about work or planning for work. It requires so much of our imagination and so much of our a sense of livelihood can come from that too. And so we're starting a series on how to inhabit all of that in a healthy way.
That's right.
As best as we understand it. And I'm here with my buddy Pete. And I'm looking forward to, starting the series and having that conversation with you today.
So am I, Jason.
So one of the things that I feel is probably good to level set on before we talk about work is to, what are all our understandings before we even enter into a discernment of it that would be helpful for us to just have shared definitions of, because we can think of work in sort of a modern context and it has all sorts of ideas, but I just want to at least bring our audience along with what you and I think about work as it relates to more of a kingdom reality than might be. So when you think about work, what are some of the first considerations that you want to level set on?
I really like the way that's all set up, the way that you invite us to think about it there. I think it's valuable to say that, just to note that so many people experience work as a real struggle in their lives and a place of enormous discomfort and sometimes simultaneously enormous confusion. Because on the one hand, they know it has to be done. They know they've got to work. And on the other hand, life occurs at such a pace these days that very few of these matters are discerned to a degree that could ever become something like fulfillment in people's lives. And I think putting that in front of people's minds, just to think on for a moment, the pace of life is not suited to properly discerning this matter. The pace of life as it comes to me in culture. And I think that means that we're inviting people to think, to secure for themselves a mode of thinking, some time away from the culture in order to regard this in a way that can actually serve them. So establishing a clearing inside of which to think properly about the matter, I think that has to be an antecedent to any claim on success in this space. And it's just a good habit to invite people into in general, to not try to discern something in a hurry, but to slow it down. So that would actually be my first encouragement there, is when we come to any matter that is a part of our lives in a living way, a way that is unmistakable, that we can't escape. To give those matters their due course by thinking about them carefully.
Yeah, in some ways, I can imagine that we're seeing things around work that are a YouTube video on how to do X better in your job. Right. And we stay at that level of
which is pretty myopic.
And myopic meaning like small
That's
and
right. Restricted.
self-oriented.
Yeah.
It's not very imaginative. And what I hear you saying is like one of the first things when we think about work is, can we slow down and create enough space to think about how can I enter into this thing that's such a massive part of my
That's
day,
right.
week, month, year, lifetime,
Lifetime. Yeah.
and ask the question, is there a better way to inhabit this than just by the default of which I'm going to enter
That's right.
into that?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And so once you've got a clearing established, then work becomes a matter of sustenance. It becomes a matter of providence. And again, the narrow definitions that culture places on that tend to restrict what we think about it in general. And we miss that work is also meant to be a place for dynamic, creative expression. And it's meant to be aligned with the nature of the person who is doing the work. And we probably would do well to distinguish between a society that was properly oriented around the right values to be able to sustain good work itself, and to recognize that listeners come from an array of different cultural backgrounds and different cultural contexts that they currently inhabit. And we might be speaking to somebody who lives inside of a very narrow range of living opportunities. You know, they might be in a rural or a third world context even. And what we say to them about work, without qualifying that and kindly offering that awareness to them, can have the effect of being very oppressive. And so I just want to name that too. But in a society that's rightly ordered, if we can imagine that, if we can imagine reliable institutions, and we can imagine contexts for work that are generative because they're meeting some real need in the world, and they're doing that in a fair exchange of labor to compensation, that might be a loose definition on a healthy society. It's important that we invite people to ask about the things that they've always been interested in when they were still, when they were with themselves in their thoughts. And going back to their youth, they likely noticed that they had a different spate of interests that they carried with them than their siblings, for example. And the family is a good place to begin asking questions about work, because it's our first relation to people who can mirror back to us who we are. And so another principle is that work is always connected to identity. Okay? But I don't want us to get too far afield there. Are we tracking okay?
Yeah. I want to get to the part with identity, and that makes sense, and I think we should get there. But first, let's set a few more, maybe more foundational.
Good.
Although I understand identity is pretty foundational.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were talking about interests.
Yeah, and it seems I think the question that feels like it's underlying some of that is, do you believe that work can be deeply fulfilling? And I think most people enter work and say, oh, I need to work in order to make money, in order to live.
Right.
Right? Like it kind of comes down to that very basic, well, of course I got to live because I got to generate income in some way. Or
yeah, and then the imagination tends to be truncated or captured in that space, and making money efficiently becomes a very strong draw that restricts creative thought about what work could otherwise include or involve. And it's there inside of the narratives that children are bound up by right from the jump in their educational journeys. A little more strongly and a little more fixed in the United States versus Canada. The sequence, high school, college, degree, employment, big company, insurance, etc. That script kind of gets rolled out in front of people in a way that doesn't invite much thought. It becomes a prognosis, okay? And so, the question I think that ought to be asked alongside that is, if we weren't simply to follow the script that's handed to us, what things would we begin to consider and to look for and listen for with regard to somebody that we deeply love and we want to be well and we want to be fulfilled? And you and I are fathers. I've got our eldest child is 19. He's a young man, and he's asking these questions right now. And his whole life, I've had the question before me, who is he? Okay. And he is going to show up as the range of his interests, the things that are truly his voice in the world. And those aspects of his true personhood are the only ways that he can actually bless or benefit another person. He can't do that as somebody else. It has to be as him. And so we're getting some clues right in that initial space about how to think about work. We think about work in relation to who the person is and what they may have in them to gift to the world.
Yeah, I can hear somebody thinking, not literally, but I can see the thought of like, okay, we're making a claim here that the meaningful way to enter into work is as oneself, with the interests that we have that we can express, with our gifts that we have that we can express, with the capacity that we have that we can express. But I think that there's a question that's before that question is like, okay, but that sounds like a luxury. Or that feels like I imagine that hits people as a new idea, as a novel idea for them to say, yeah, that sounds wonderful, but that doesn't feel real. So what gives you the confidence that that would be a consideration at the beginning point as you start entering into work or any sort of marketplace where any sort of exchange? Like, why do you feel confident that that is a way that you can consider entering into work?
Well, because of my experience, for one, in my own life, but also because of my observations. The contrast between people who have engaged work with the cultural goals in mind that we described, the most efficient way to the most amount of money in the shortest period of time is kind of the credo there. Contrasting that with myriad examples of people who have, whether on the other side of burnout in that very dynamic I just named, after revelation that their work had them, they did not have their work, and the crisis that tends to follow from that, began to ask questions about who they were and what would amount to fulfillment in those spaces, or whether by having the social and familial infrastructure to inform these questions in them in their youth and enter into the work force, the labor force, that way. But on the personal side of things, I know this to be true, and I know this to be a way because of my own experience of the thing. And it's it's not the case that anybody can discern themselves in some kind of complete and total way before entering the labor force. Nobody knows themselves in the era of their lives when they do become a part of the labor force. We enter the labor force young. I started working when I was 12 on farms and whatnot, and I didn't know myself very well. But it's in the risks of taking on things that we're generally interested in that we discover more of who we are, isn't it? It's in those contexts that we're tested and we learn what our aptitudes are. We learn what others' aptitudes are sometimes, and we sometimes learn that we don't have those aptitudes. And we start to see the gift of people in their unique genius as themselves in those spaces, if we're looking for it and listening for it. And I entered into the labor force in a blue-collar context and was a carpenter for years, 10 years in total professionally. And I loved that work. But as I plied my trade there were also other reflections that were given back to me. Yes, you're a good carpenter, but you're the guy that everybody speaks to at lunch hour about what's going on in their lives. And our lunch hours are extended because people want to talk to you about that instead of putting up that wall, or putting that roof on. And so you listen to the reflections that others give to you by way of the benefit that you are to them. And these become signposts for us in our identity. And you and I have shared, my line that I exchanged one form of renovation for another, right? That became my invitation. There was a guy on the job site, a dear friend of mine named Rolly. And he said, "What are you doing here? Hey, you're meant to go to university. You're meant to help people. You're meant to be doing what you're doing at lunch hour." I didn't have that thought in mind, and I would not have had that thought. And now I had a deep sense of feeling compelled into the space to listen to people deeply. And I had a deep sense that there was something in me to say that could bless them. And it was more of a manner at that point than it was a body of knowledge or experience. But it was still an impulse that felt connected to who I was and was affirmed by the people in the community around me, right? And that is a means to the beginnings of a discernment at that age. And then it requires a risk. Okay, I'm going to leave carpentry. Okay, I didn't just do a hard break and start university. But I'm going to apply to university and I'm going to explore this. And then you glean more reflections about who you are. And because you're tested in different domains, you learn new aptitudes there. And you also have reinforced to you what your aptitudes aren't. In my case, it was reinforced to me that my aptitudes are not in the territory of mathematics or statistics. And I needed help there from people who had that in their apparatus as a self. But we must do what we are if fulfillment is a part of our quest. We have to exercise the things that are in us. And we need a place for those aspects of the self to land. And given how much time we spend at work and the size of the population who spends the majority of their days there without a connection between who they are and what they do, it's no wonder that we go to war. It's no wonder that there's societal churn, that people experience the culture these days as frenetic and violent. I believe it's because people are not aligned inside of a calling, and we can get to that at some point in the future. But just bringing it back to the young man or the young woman entering into the labor force, taking time and doing this in a communal way to ask about their gifts and capacities. It was one of the first questions I asked people when they would come into my clinic as a psychotherapist, and it always caught them off guard. Okay, they'd come in with a presenting problem, and they'd really want to make sure I understood what was wrong with them, what had happened to them, etc. And we'd talk about that for sure. But I would always ask them, what are your gifts and capacities? Hey, what do you have a natural interest in? What do you know yourself to do well? What are your strengths? And we have this need for perpetual connection to those parts of ourselves. And if those parts of ourselves are not employed in our work, that means that the bulk of our day is spent being somebody that we're not. That's one of the implications on the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
Or at least arresting who we are and waiting for 5 o'clock so that we can go be ourselves again.
I've talked to recently a bunch of young people who are in different places in this conundrum. One of them was this young woman, and the way she talked about it was that her parents spoke over her that she would be a nurse. And that she ended up in a place where there was this like practical expression of nursing where she was on the field having to do nursing things. And she realized, she's like, I cannot do this.
Right.
This is like, she didn't have the stomach for field dressing a wound.
Right. Yeah.
And she's like, what do I do now?
Yes.
Right. And it's like,
how old was she? In general.
Probably at that time, early 20s.
Okay.
Right. And that, if her parents were wrong in that, what does that mean? And so then she got stuck in this conundrum of having to figure out, well, if I'm not this, then what am I?
Yeah.
And there was an expectation of being that for a certain reason. It came with financial stability. It came with all that, those kinds of things, service, all those things.
There's also notions of honor in so many cultures.
Of course.
That have scripts on what the accepted professions are in that culture.
Right. Yeah. You can think certain cultures think doctors, lawyers.
That's right.
Nurses.
In one. Yeah.
And so then you're in this place where you're like, that's not me. And then what do I do? And then I've had other conversations as it relates to this where people actually find success and they end up, success begets more success, and they end up at the top of one or another ladder.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't have it in me to give what I've already taken on as being able to provide.
Right.
And that causes this huge amount of either pouring myself out to try and, is this enough? Is this enough? Is this enough? Seems to be the question that kind of comes. And it's not a conscious question that they're asking. They're just trying to say, look, I already received maybe financial payment for this. And it's a lot. And now I have to say, can I meet that?
Right.
And I feel like I'm particularly susceptible to that kind of way of operating, or I have been in the past, without this level of clarity. But
proving your value in a space.
Yeah. So entering into undiscerned vocation as to, is this me? And then having to fulfill that.
Right.
And is it in me or not to fulfill
Occupy the station and its duties regardless of whether it's suited to you, because it's a reflection of who you are.
Yeah. And I've just heard this conversation several times over the last several months. And And it really hits people as burden,
Yes.
deep, deep burden in that. And so if we kind of go back and say, okay, well, what allows us to make the claim that you should do work as yourself, of what is actually within you?
Mhm.
It's that not doing it that way, you have a bunch of stories from a decade and a half in therapy.
Mhm.
I've got some from the last few months,
Yeah.
but it seems to me that the alternative of not doing it that way
Proves the case.
proves the case,
Yeah.
leads to burnout, leads to
Yeah.
dissatisfaction, uh, leads to a lack of meaning and purpose.
It also stifles creativity and the production of more beauty into the world. If we come back to the first call to work, right, in the Genesis narrative, and for people who don't have a religious tradition that they follow, or are maybe not familiar with Christianity, Genesis is the first book included in the Bible in the way that it's arranged, and there's a creation story in there. And God makes humankind in his own image. And one of the primary distinctions about humankind in those terms is that we're made to steward. We're meant to take care. We're given this garden, and we're given it to take care of, to tend it into more of itself. And we bear out this distinction in the entire created order, human beings do, that reflects that we are like God in our ability to create, to steward things and create beauty with what we are stewarding, right? To issue it into its most beautiful form. And not being able to do that with any kind of regularity is going to cause a reflex in somebody, in the same way that if you starve someone for a prolonged period of time, their appetite is going to be a beastly thing when they finally have access to food again. They're going to overdo it, okay? Or they're going to treat it with such scarcity that they try to keep it. But it will be a distortion. And I think, just as we're talking about the consequences of not finding ourselves in positions where we're actually suited to the work that we're doing, that's going to come out of us as an expression of starvation in some other way, likely a vice, likely an addiction of some kind, because the pain of not expressing who we are for 9 hours a day and having an hour of window or margin on the other side of that after a long commute, I'm going to be in a state of starvation for personal expression that is true and beautiful. That's what human beings are made for, truth and beauty. And if my work requires a stymieing of my capacities around the truth and around what's beautiful, then I am going to be a hurting self. And I think it's important to put that before people's minds, because I think that describes a large portion of our population. And with the concerns that we hold for young men and women in the culture, to help them into seeing the folly in that, okay, and the promise that's made besides that, colloquially, what's that old hip hop song? Money can't buy me happiness. Okay. But then whoever it is says, but I'm happiest when I can buy what I want and do what I want. Right? That's baked into the lyrics. I can't remember who it was.
The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and bees. I want the money.
Right. Yeah. And so that just kind of rings out in the culture. But the mythology of that is proven, the folly of that is proven in the collective dis-ease of the culture. You know, when you walk into a large corporate setting, are the people there generally happy? And by happy, I mean contented and inspired. Okay. And you're right when we were talking at the beginning about how much of that is thought of as a luxury. But is the fact that it is a luxury to think about such things warrant for saying that they ought not to be thought of? Or is it a signpost of what ought to be? Because we can't help but to think about what could be if I wasn't stuck here in this job, what I would be doing otherwise if I wasn't stuck here in this job. And the otherwise typically means I would be expressing myself creatively to the betterment and the good of the people in my locale with what I'm made to do. That would be the alternative. And so why wouldn't we encourage people, and young people especially, to think in these terms so that they're aiming in the right places when they do enter the labor force? They're listening for the right things. It's not ever a matter of making the right decision right out of the gate, because you're going to become a self in the work as you do it. You're going to be revealed to yourself. You can't know who you are right off the jump. People who tighten the screws too early become tyrants or miserable, right? They live according to this contract that they wrote with themselves. But to engage it humbly and say, there is a self that I must express into the world if fulfillment is one of the things that I have as a desired hallmark in my life. And if a fulfilled person is more a blessing to the people around them than an unfulfilled person, then it's a worthy pursuit for everybody. And I think those are good terms to think about work inside of.
Yeah, I think an observation that I have is people do try to find fulfillment, and when they don't get it at work,
in the rubric,
in the current way people often enter into work as the culture that we kind of find ourselves in, then they end up either trying to live that outside, right? Or they try to, it's living for the weekend, but it could be living for the trip. It could be living for the experience of something,
profound,
whatever it might be. But that's where it's like, they can't help but try and find it.
That's right.
And what I hear you saying, and what I agree with, is this idea of consider the fact that you have a certain, you have gifts and capacities, like you were saying. And would life not be better if those true gifts and capacities were considered to be the offering that you bring into work?
That's right.
And finding places, structures, functions of being able to take those gifts and capacities and share them with other people. And if you just think of, like you were talking about beauty, I think beauty comes when a person is unconstrained by the having to fit me into something that's not me, right? And if it's not constrained, then you could say, well, how do I express myself in a way that actually brings value to people, right? Because if there are gifts and capacities, then those gifts and capacities are experienced as gift. And is that not where real value is?
That's it.
If somebody's experiencing me as gift.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, like I have meaning and I have purpose and I matter. And I can see the reward in the person who's receiving that from me. And that might be that I create a product and it's like, oh, this is really, good for somebody else, and you sell that product. Or it could be a service, right? Where somebody's, hey, this thing that I can do for you actually brings joy and fulfillment to your life in a way. Or it carries a burden with you in being able to do what you're aiming at doing in life.
True self is always a gift, right? True inhabitation of self is always a gift. And it's always the truest gift that I have to give. Again, I can't bless you as anybody except as Pete. I can't inhabit someone else's gifts and capacities to bless you. I can only offer that of myself. And when we're talking about gifts and capacities, I think it's also important, and this becomes an opportunity to think about the cultural moment and the cult of the self. And the cult of the self asks some of these questions. This is where it can get tricky and dicey for people. And you hear so many complaints properly about, Jonathan Haidt describes it as the coddling of the American mind. That the youth of today are obsessively focused on their wants. And I think that that's true. They're also simultaneous to that, craving meaning and purpose. And this becomes the opportunity to distinguish for people in the discernment of good work, right? Back to that initial question. Are my gifts and capacities being offered to my neighbor into their real needs? That's where things become pulled into alignment, and that's where work becomes redemptive and not merely a fantasy for personal fulfillment, because that's one of the deceptions of youth. If I can just go out and get what I want in life, I'll be satisfied. And the people who follow that out with, dogmatic interest discover pretty early, if they're paying attention, that all of this serving myself is woefully unfulfilling. And that again proves the nature of a human being, what we're made for. And so it's this special ingredient of, yes, I'm discerning what my gifts and capacities are, and I'm thinking about how I can express those in creative forms. But the cherry on that sundae and the dynamic that brings a completion to them, a fullness and a wholeness, and completes a loop is, can it serve Jason? Can it serve Dakota? Hey, have I oriented myself to the needs around me in such a way that I can actually be of proven service to the people that I love and the people that I endeavor to love, I'm aspiring to love, if it's my colleagues who are strangers to me in some sense? Are my gifts and capacities being submitted into that space in a way that is for them? And that's when momentum starts to happen in terms of fulfillment. That's when we start to discover identity. It's always in service, and there's no substitute for that. And so if we were to invite a young person to think about, what ought I to be thinking about at this stage in the game? You're never harming yourself. You're never prolonging your fulfillment if you're thinking about how to serve. That will summon you into territories that reveal more to you of yourself more efficiently than any other dynamic in life can. And it feels like a risk because people are given a scarcity mentality. If I think about serving others, are others going to have a leg up on me who have been engaging this quest of material gain and social capital, all these things I'm told I have to hold on to? If I take the risk of putting those down, will I actually be fulfilled? The answer is yes, you'll never be fulfilled in the other thing. So I think those are very important questions for young people to ask. And when's the time to begin submitting my gifts and capacities into the service of other people and their needs? It's always yesterday. I can engage it right now. And it will incline me into new dynamics and new opportunities that can become what we rightly call gainful employment at that point. Right? And the gain, though, in that case, is not merely for me. My gainful employment means that other people are benefiting. Culture around me is gaining from the expression of myself into the world through my service. And everything from mechanics to horticulture is on that list.
Yeah, some of it is one of the traps that I've seen gets close into this is the trap of when somebody goes and looks to do something to figure out who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so
It's where most of us start.
Yeah, I think it's very common.
Yeah.
The ideal path would be that somebody says, your parents and the community around you says, hey, this is who we see you are.
Mm-hmm.
And like your friend telling you, hey, like you should go to university, is a relationship almost bestowing an identity on you. And then you go and try to express that identity and then see where it lands more true in those. But a lot of the time, it feels like it's the other way around, where I have to go out there and figure out, I got to do something in order to figure out who I am, in order to be in some sort of meaningful set of relationships.
That's right.
And that feels like it's disordered.
Yeah, it is.
And it leads to, that can also lead to so much unrest, because then I'm work seeking identity.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden I'm getting churned up and like, it's like, hey, can you see? Can you see? And it becomes this question that we bring to every interaction in work. Is
That's
like,
right.
Do I have what it takes? Am I good enough?
Yeah. And then the environment, if I can, the environment becomes a proving ground for the self rather than an employment of the self.
Like an expression of the self.
That's right. And that's when I use the language of violence in work. When somebody is not honest with themselves about the fact that they're still discerning them, and they then want to go and sometimes not even consciously aware that they're doing this. But this matter at work becomes the thing that is going to pronounce, I feel, a verdict over me. And then the thing becomes about me. And now I'm not doing the work for the work's sake anymore. And I'm veiling that. I'm trying to hide that from people. And you get 5 of those dynamics into a room when there's 10 people in the room, and 5 of them are actually trying to quest after a clarified personhood. And it's no wonder that we can't settle this work matter, because people aren't honest with themselves about what they feel is at stake in connection to this thing. And we've all been around individuals who are interrupting violently, with violence, the process and the boundaries and the territory of our station and its duties as our work.
Yeah, and just to clarify, violent as in it's a violation. It's not necessarily that you're getting punched out of your work, right?
No, but it is that it will occur at a pace and with an intensity, and it will be a labor within a labor, because there are 2 things happening.
Yeah.
One is the work, and the other is the noise around the work that I haven't put my finger on yet.
Yeah, so there's you walk into a corporate culture, and you got to understand the culture in order to make sense of anything. And where that culture isn't grounded in some deep and defining sense of truth, as truth as anyone can understand it. But there's I don't even want to call it truth, but there's an alternative truth.
That's right.
I know that's not a real thing, but like
there's a narrative.
There's a narrative in there that unless you can catch that narrative and know how to operate within it, you are moving nowhere.
Yeah.
Another example of that would be like the negative aspects of micromanagement, right? Where somebody is like, this is the violence that you're talking about. It's like, none of us like being micromanaged. And I think, just to add a definition here, where the details matter so much that they feel like life or death all the time. And so control being exerted on a one doing the work, that it becomes so constrictive. And so you talked about the creative energy coming out. It's like, these are the places where undiscerned selves who work their way into places of authority end up quelching the value that can get produced by those they're entrusted to lead.
Yeah, very good.
So this is the kind of violence that you're talking about. And when you experience that, you go home at the end of the day going, that sucked. Like, how do I navigate my boss? How do I manage up? How do I do all of these things? Not that managing up is a bad thing in and of itself, but you're all of a sudden figuring out how to play this game that everyone else has figured out the rules to. And that in every corporation that you go to where this dynamic is at play, you're having to figure out the narrative before you can even operate within it.
Yeah.
That feels exhausting.
It is. It's plainly exhausting.
And unproductive.
It is unproductive. And the other aspect to the violence in what you described is, this is back to our nature. We're made to live inside of bonds of trust, because that's how love is expressed. Love in the intimate terms that mark it is meant to be expressed in a dynamic exchange of offering and reception that we call trust. And high demand, low trust environments are always violent. And high demand, low trust is another way to say what that is that it's dictatorial, or it's tyrannical, right? Or it's totalitarian. So what micromanaging ultimately is. I don't trust you, so I'm going to exert control. I'm going to try and rein in your will, whether it's I as a parent, or I as a boss, or I as a community member, or I as a spouse, etc. If I don't trust you, that does mean that I'm controlling you, or I'm attempting to. And the soul dies a slow death in those kinds of contexts. We're made for bonds of trust. We're made to love.
Yeah, and the individual's agency doesn't come out as a human need, right?
And
where it's, if I'm being micromanaged, then I'm not being trusted to act through my own power.
And if you don't have agency, what else don't you have?
Well, you would probably not have a sense of your voice gets lost in the process, where you can't act, right? And so like, okay, if I can't act, can I speak truth in the context? That feels like gets lost. And the other thing would be dignity.
That's right.
Like how do I have the dignity of work where I'm being pushed into, I've got my action is I'm pushed into, the thumb is placed on me in order to, you will only express yourself in the way I tell you to express.
That's it.
And so
dignity and sovereignty are the net loss inside of a absence of trust. And then a third in that dynamic can't exist either, honor.
Mm.
And so if we were to ask people listening, how many of them in their place of work feel dignified connection to self-expression and honor in their personhood? And I grieve the
Sure.
anticipated response to that, right? But to not take the air completely out of everybody's balloon on the subject, what are the antidotes to that? And not just the antidotes, but the glowing opportunities. I do believe that the world is on the precipice of a third war because of exactly what we're talking about right now. You just think about these matters at scale. Think about a family where the father and mother are fearful and petty micromanagers of their children because they don't have a clarified identity in themselves, and they project onto their kids in a way that requires of their kids that they secure the dreams that mom and dad never had. Okay? Pretty common story. How well do the children in those contexts tend to get along? How safe do they feel in that context?
Yeah, not.
What is the likelihood that the son in that mix of dad is constantly critical of him? Micromanages. When he's out fixing the car with his boy, if he's just shouting at him, give me the wrench, I'll do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
The likelihood is that that kid's not going to aspire to an education that is connected to any sense of who he is. He's going to become another individual who just enters the labor force and gets stuck inside of the trap of getting this month's rent. And you've got another individual in society that is on the roadway with you at 5:30, hating their life. Okay?
Scared to make mistakes.
Scared to make mistakes.
Scared to risk.
That's right.
Not able to find bonds of trust.
Not filled with much hope in their future, etc. That kind of person is vulnerable to extremes on either side of honor, on either side of dignity. And they're extremes of omission or commission. But it's those kinds of substrates that beget war, that beget corruption, because people are so unsatisfied or so malnourished that in their starvation, they're willing to do things, whether they are sensation-seeking kinds of activities that become addiction. I was talking with my wife last night about how many lawyers I worked with who engaged in very dangerous and salacious. People would come to see me because of addiction and whatnot, and and I had a lot of clients in that world. So this isn't a commentary about lawyers. It's a commentary about high pressure dynamics in work, high responsibility. How many lawyers I worked with who engaged in salacious kinds of very dangerous addictions, and how much that was a reflection of their starvation and their need for relief and repose. And so they had to do it in these concentrated ways that were in secret.
What do you mean by salacious? If you can.
Very dangerous and very vulnerable, risky sexual encounters, for example.
Where you're picking up a prostitute that can
Prostitution
ruin your
or-
reputation.
that's
and
right.
can wreck your marriage,
And it's
your
all
reputation.
on the line, and you can get disbarred and all of these consequences. But that's part of the risk, because they're so starving for meaning and for some expression that makes them feel alive again. and their spirits are withering inside because every hour they spend just keeping up billable hours inside of these high conflict dynamics without any eye to what they need
Mm-hmm.
in the mix becomes a caricatured expression of them in the form of an addiction.
And there's many stories that get into this place, but you can imagine like, oh yeah, I became a lawyer. I studied hard. I applied my intellect and my intelligence onto in this direction. I negotiated a really high, good salary.
Yeah, became a partner.
And then because I negotiated this high salary and they said yes, now I find myself inside this high pressure or high,
my golden handcuffs.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm in this situation.
I'm consigned to this.
Yeah, like co-signed into
That's
it,
right.
And that can be scary to admit to yourself.
And so it reveals that not all treasure in the world is finance. And that is another of the things to be put before a young person's mind and heart.
It reminds me of the C.S. Lewis, this author. I believe it's in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where there's this dragon's gold, and the questing of it turns you into, once you touch it, it turns you into a dragon yourself. And then you're in this trap of you're, perpetuating the problem. You become a dragon by questing after the gold.
Yeah.
And I can see parts of all of us that we, in that quest being the quest, we end up feeling like dragons and not ourselves anymore anyways. And needing to be rescued from that kind of dynamic.
That's right. Yeah. And so for a lot of people, they are in the midst, like squarely in that trap right now. A good number of the people that listen to this will find themselves right there. And I think it's important to speak to that population and invite some hope into that mix. Because I know personally what it's like to be so threadbare that you don't even have time for your own thoughts at the end of a long work week. There were many years where I was keeping a very, I would say, dangerous pace as it regarded the client hours that I kept. And when you're in that lane, it's hard to have generative thought. It's hard to have thought beyond the doom that you feel, because you don't have the energy to even think about what a solution might amount to, 20 years into a career or whatever it happens to be. And I've found that a lot of people make the mistake of immediately asking questions about whether they're in the right career, instead of asking the question, what could I engage tomorrow that would allow for the expression of some of these dynamics in me that simply haven't been being expressed, And a lot of times that becomes an important matter of asking, who has the right vision around me for life? Who is doing good things that are bearing evidently good fruit into the world? And how could I align myself with some of that activity? And it may not even be in your work. It may just be a thing you pick up besides. And I'll make the elevator pitch here again for service, right? You'll find remarkable people by asking who is serving, who is out there oriented to the needs of the needy, or making something more beautiful or bringing order to chaos. These are all vision dynamics, and they're meaning and purpose dynamics. And maybe I can't shed the golden handcuffs tomorrow. Maybe I couldn't even begin to think about what that might look like. But I'm left with the dilemma. If I wait for energy, the day for change is never going to come. And so I'm going to have to do something despite the fact that I don't have the energy. And to say to people that that's actually that's a possibility, that you can act against your desires in that sense, and you can push through the limitations of your body in special seasons of life when you regard the matter as the life and death thing that it is. You can find motivation there. And then it's to ask questions about, what do I want to experience in my work day that I simply haven't been because I've been ascribing to this narrative that was sold to me? And who said I have to ascribe to it? And so maybe I don't need to just stop my work as a lawyer today and go pick up gardening or farming or something like that. Maybe it's not that extreme. Maybe it's just taking the risk of expressing myself into the context in a novel way that meets the desires of my heart and serves in that space. And so it might be that I've never really gotten to know the people in my environment because I've been so captured by this notion of competition with them. But there's this imminent opportunity to bless people wherever I have a neighbor. And I've got all these neighbors at my work. And I've passed by Jim 50 times this year without so much as asking him once about how his life is going, and whether he's got a family, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I start living according to a different narrative in the space. And as I start stepping in that direction, I'm growing that trust dynamic. I'm exercising trust because as I put down my frenetic obsession with making the next dollar or making more than Jim, I take the risk of doing that, and I ask God for help there, and help will come. I pick up in place of that the risk of actually regarding Jim inside of his needs. And that draws me into a different alignment with my gifts and capacities. And I have a way of communicating that might benefit Jim. And all of a sudden, my work context is beginning to change. And mature people know that you don't make drastic decisions, that you don't find solutions by trying to rescue yourself out of the dynamic. Life doesn't tend to work that way. You're not going to be magically presented with this epiphany of what you otherwise ought to be doing. You're going to have to go and find it. And the surest path to finding it is to ask who needs to be served. That's I think, the ingredient that I would want to put before a young person's mind and heart, because it's not the intuitive thing. It's not what your body's impulses are going to tell you. It's not what your emotions are going to tell you. It's not what your anxiety is going to tell you. Your anxiety is going to tell you, look out for you. Get a little more today, tuck that away, hold on to it. And if there's time tomorrow, bless Jim. And the result of that is, of course, that Jim never gets blessed in that equation. So I got to start doing that now. I take those risks, and then I find a path. Then it becomes a little clearer. Oh, I am meant to leave this job. In my case, I was meant to do something besides carpentry. Meant to. It wasn't merely a preference. I was never going to be fulfilled in the expression of who I was into the world there on its own.
Or it would have been limited to lunch breaks.
It would have, more of my heart would have been oriented to those lunch breaks. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would have been distracted in my work because I wasn't doing the thing that I had this sense of call around.
Yeah.
Right.
Or you were trying to live the sense of call in the lunch
In the
room,
wrong container.
in the wrong container.
That's right.
And that they're bigger. But what I hear is the flip side of that too, is that what emerged in the lunchroom was
That's
actually a
right.
beautiful direction for you and for the high-powered lawyer that you're kind of, that population that
Yes.
we're speaking to. That's not just high-powered lawyer, but it could be anyone in these dynamics of feeling unfulfilled
That's right.
in the career that they're in. Is it might be that the lunchroom is a great place to start.
That's
you
it.
know, and
That's it.
maybe you guys don't hang out at lunch and no one does lunch together.
Yeah.
And taking some courage to say, hey, do you want to do lunch with me on Thursday?
That's right.
And then say, I just want to get to know you a little bit better and
Yep.
see what gifting space for relationship to occur, what that might, unfold.
That's right.
And to see where your interests lie and to
Yep.
see those kinds of things. But the other one that feels like quite practical is like, if you could volunteer for a couple hours a week somewhere, what kind of grabs some sense of
That's
interest in that way?
Yeah.
And actually the girl I was talking about who had this nurse thing, she had just done a decade ago,
Okay.
where the nurse experience of like, I'm not made for nursing occurred. And then what ended up happening is she always volunteered to do something beautiful at her church, which was to play music. She was a worship leader. And full circle, she's now, she just left another creative career to pursue that full time.
Fantastic.
And so much joy, so much fulfillment. And the beautiful arc to that story is that her parents are so proud of her for, and they see the freedom and fulfillment that comes of that's who she's always been.
Beautiful.
Right. And
yeah, we all have to go on our odyssey. Right. And it's very often the case that we do. And we can talk about maybe in future episodes about the seasons of development, what the 20s tend to be saddled with in our years of growth versus our 30s versus our 40s, etc. But the odyssey is typically one of going out and being tested in all of these domains. And then, coming home, thinking we've finished the journey, only to realize we just started. And that's there in the work of Homer, for sure. And it's really there as the hero's quest in all great mythological literature. And it is each of our own journey to undergo as well. And so there's a beautiful encouragement to make into that space. Just as you're giving us the beautiful example of this wonderful story. That's a story of homecoming, as you describe it. This young woman is returned to herself, and she had to go out and discover everything she was not out there in the world. But she comes full circle, and go figure, back to the original desires of her heart. She loved music. And she had to taste how unsavory other things were in order to have a valuation on music that she could properly cherish and therefore properly express with the kind of care that people can experience as beautiful.
Yeah. So we talked about people who find themselves in careers that are, for whatever length of time, undiscerned, and like, how do we change out of them? What about people who are trying to enter or re-enter the workforce?
Yeah.
And they're like, Man, I'm just happy with any job right now. I need to pay bills.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So what's the encouragement for them?
The encouragement is to show up wherever you are as you. And no place of employment. I was going to say, but for the most tyrannical, but we have to include the most tyrannical in there too. The most tyrannical place of employment we can conceive of, and the most heroic among us can recall, is a concentration camp. And it's valuable to ask questions like, well, does this principle hold true as a principle, in that it is proven true in any context? And I think this one is. And it brings to mind the work and the life of Viktor Frankl, who was a Jewish man who was taken into the concentration camps in the Second World War in the Nazi occupation. And his big revelation in an incredible book that he wrote called Man's Search for Meaning was that his humanity consisted in his determined holding of his character in the worst of conditions, and that he could have sovereignty and he could have dignity in any context so long as he never surrendered his right to choose his response to his oppressor. That was his grand revelation there, that my humanity consists in the keeping of that in myself, the refusal to give consent over to somebody else so that it's now their voice. I become them. I become my oppressor by speaking back to my oppressor in the dialect of my oppressor. Or I refuse it, and I keep my dignity, and I hold my honor, and I hold that for others too. And he found that biological life was contingent on that in somebody's spirit. And he talks in harrowing terms about watching somebody lose their moral core and their spirit give up. And he knew to the day when that person's body would perish on the other side of that. That principle, if it can be true in a concentration camp, it can be taken into a modern workspace in the West. And what it can mean for me in my day is that I can endeavor to live with honor, and I can endeavor to uphold that for other people. And my work I may not have the luxury of living my calling as my employment. There may be a whole population of single mothers who listen to this and who wouldn't tell you that their employment at the Dollar General was what they had in mind as a life calling and career. But they have to go there every day because they've got 3 kids at home who need food. And that woman is nonetheless called to show up in that space as the good idea that she is, and to bless people there as herself and redeem the environment, because one human, at least in that mix, is committed to honor and not bearing false witness and not withholding their personhood from everybody else's benefit in that space. And so we're never off the hook so far as that goes. But the flip side of the coin of not ever being off the hook is that we are always presented that beautiful opportunity wherever we are. And if calling and work are about more than merely our gainful employment, then that means that as much of our work environment is contingent on our behavior and our determinations as it is anybody else's, our boss included. And so for a young person, am I entering into my daily work with a clarified ethic? Do I know what I won't compromise on? Do I know what the conditions are for my leaving this place if X, Y, and Z don't change? These are good things to discern. And they're always benefited by community. And so just a second thing that kind of brings it full circle here. Back to asking people about young people and entry into labor.
Mm-hmm.
To ask the question and to take it on very seriously with a belly full of courage. Do I keep company with people who properly see me? This is precursory, and this is a sustaining matter. It's precursory if I've never been in the labor force before. As I'm asking that question, am I surrounded by a population, however small, of people who properly see me? Because that is going to spell out in great detail the philosophy that I enter into the work with, but also the type of work to which I aspire. And a good litmus test on people's capacity to see me properly is to ask the question, are they endeavoring to love me? Are they willing my good? And if I'm, in my late teenage years or early 20s, and I'm still keeping company with people who don't have my well-being in mind, maybe I'm keeping company with them because the culture says they're the kinds of people that you ought to keep company with if you're going to aspire toward these goals that you're told you're supposed to have. You're going to come out of that mix with a more distorted understanding of who you are. That's the cost of keeping the wrong company. You will be arrested in your development. And you'll merely be postponing your maturity, is one way to think about it. So, am I placed in contexts by my own choice and by grace where I am being discerned in community? And am I cultivating the right ethics based on my understanding of what a human being is? And then, where are the range of employment opportunities or possibilities that wouldn't violate that in me, but would give me some form of a clearing to go and exercise that and to grow as I do?
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we understand that.
Yeah, good.
It requires relationship to understand who you are.
That's right. There's no understanding of self without another.
And in one sense, from our earliest days, we actually see ourselves in the faces of other
That's
people.
right.
In a very real sense, in the faces of our mother before our prefrontal cortex is developed.
Yeah.
And in another sense, what people reflect back to us as to who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And what I hear you saying is you can trust the faces that reflect you back to you if you are convinced that they love you. That's the truer forms, is the degree of which they love you is the degree to which their reflection back to you as to who you are holds the most meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And the hope would be that we could enter into, from that place, whether it be friends and family, we can enter into workplaces that perpetuate that, and that, life will beget more life in that way. That would be the hope. But at least to start with the idea of find the people who love you already, and not the people who quote unquote love you for what you can benefit them by. And I think that's part of the trick is like,
Can you say more about the benefit them by part?
yeah, in the sense of, well, my friendship with you, my friendship with one is, oh, I'm networking, right? And we're, we enter into this networking relationship because your network is your
association.
Yeah, your network is your net worth. We've heard sayings like that, which has some degrees of truth to it. But so then we are saying, yes, we're both in this for the same reason, and we'll use each other to that end.
Right.
Right? Like that's not the same as I care about you becoming you.
That's right.
For your sake. Those two are very different from each other.
One is parasitic, and the other is collaborative.
Well, and it's interesting because sometimes we, what do you call it when two parasites eat each other?
That's right.
That's
right. Two fleas without a dog.
It's super parasitic. I don't know if there's an actual term for it, but that is so much of, there's industries that feel like that's the whole thing that's built off of, and you enter into them.
Well, that's business, as people understand business, right? You just gave us a modern definition for all of business. And it's broken. It's fractured. It's distorted. It will hurt you. It's guaranteed to. And if you play by its rules, you will hurt others along the way to your chosen end. So it's there for you to engage if you wish, but those will be the fruit of those principles. That as your ethic.
And it just leads to more violence.
It does. It does.
Because I will use you, and then I will also allow you to use me because we're both subscribing to the same set of rules.
That's right.
And that feels fairly terrifying. And I think that part of it isn't black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope next episode we can talk about value exchange and how that happens, and creating value and things like that. I feel like that would be a good episode. But as a teaser to that is this idea of if we're all manipulating, we're actually not creating value.
That's right.
And if I'm using you and using me, that's not actual value being created. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, despite that being in the ether all the time, we actually do things that are valuable.
Yeah.
Right? It's just if we can get the percentage of our time ordered to actual value creation, which is love, and we'll talk about this, then I'm not entering into this like, well, who's just the best at manipulating? Because that's how you go up the ladder in accumulation of
It just occurs to me as you're saying that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't take advantage of the recent opportunity given to all of us. I think it is the case that I mean, I've witnessed this so many times in my practice. I've witnessed this in my own life. We choose narratives that are not honoring of the things we nonetheless observe. We're whistling in the dark, living some story that we've adopted because it's more palatable to what our anxieties would request of us or demand of us. But if we just give a candid glimpse at the fact that right now there are millions of people scouring files with one man's name on them, and those files are a revelation about modern business and modern politics and ancient business and ancient politics. The world does this in one way. It is the way that you just described, and it leads to a living hell. It's blackmail and it's corruption and it's rule by force and it's rule by intimidation and it's survival of the fittest and it is the death of love. It's the death of love. And it's not mere speculation. It's not that it sometimes goes that way. How many people were implicated in those files? Or a better question is, what industry wasn't? And what magnates in those industries were not in those industries? Okay? This is the world that we inhabit. This is why what we're talking about inside of the dynamics of calling are so essential. Because the alternative to the world's way of doing business and all of the guarantees that are woven into that are to do it, forgive me for speaking so plainly about the matter, God's way. And to make it more personal, Christ's way, Jesus' way. He invites us into work that never compromises the honor of our neighbor. That's one way to say, what is good work? Good work is work that blesses. Good work is work that never requires of me, or work inside of which I am committed to not betraying the ethics that I'm told if I uphold, I will be fulfilled in. That's good work. And the range on types of work is no narrower there than it is in the world's way of doing it. What's different about it is that it can actually go somewhere. It can bring life to life. And the alternatives to it are proven in their folly. And I think it's a very important and very timely question to ask. How many more examples of this do we need for it to be proven for us? It's the jury's in, and I think it's worth saying that. And so to invite people into the awareness that it does not have to be that way. And to invite them into the permission to flatly refuse that as their lives. We'd be remiss if we didn't make that invitation.
Yeah, how much moral injury happens at work because whoever's in control, whoever's in authority over you, not necessarily in control over you, but whoever's in authority over you is saying, well, just do this.
Yeah.
Just fudge this
business.
thing.
That's right.
Quarterly earnings.
That's
so
right.
Therefore,
right.
These people's lives, and I'm not saying that hard choices in business don't get to be made and that,
no, not at all.
But I'm really talking about moral injury.
That's right.
Where it's like, oh, I'm being asked to do something that I know inside of me is not what I actually want to do. And that's a huge range of things.
It's a huge range.
We're not just talking about, the prostitute who really wishes she didn't have that, or the OnlyFans star who's,
that's right,
wanting to I'll just do this. The money's good, but then
to get me through college,
but I feel, conflicted in that. It's all the way down to the accountant who's like, man, I can tell a story with these numbers, and one of them is definitely truer than the other in order for this person not to be angry, or for this story to, remain true, remain in alignment with the bigger narrative that is being told about this.
Or it can be as subtle as none of us really likes Sally, and instead of going and making peace with her and finding some artful solution to our relational problems, we're going to manipulate her out of the room. We're going to put a lien on her and hope that she just exits the system.
Yeah, she'll
It is
quit because we're mean to her.
Right.
Is really
it
what
is
you're
a
saying.
big range,
Yeah,
right?
it could be on your, you know, when you log your time.
That's right. That's
Did
right.
I actually spend the time that I'm
That's it.
saying doing
Yeah.
that task to get my billable
Yeah.
hours in?
Or in your taxes and your write-offs. The range is infinite. Okay? And every one of those things that we're describing, those properly referred to as compromises, what is being compromised there? I would say love is. Okay? Love is being broken. And I'm only using the term love and the principle love and the exercise of love because it's the best. Okay? It is the highest good to will somebody else's good. And so we have to ask what's the best thing, right? What's the standard of measure? I don't think we can do better than love. That's why I'm naming it. And so how do I keep an ethic? I don't do anything that would compromise love. And I can actually think against that backdrop with my taxes and my billable hours and how I regard Sally and the whole deal. That pulls things straight when we have one principle to adhere to. And if we're to be faithful in our Christianity, at least for you and I, it happens to be the standard of measure that our Lord has chosen and exemplifies love. And so maybe the big revelation, maybe for a young person who, let's say, is in a business admin class at a regional university, being told a whole bunch of things about quarterly earnings and streamlining workflow and retention of talent and everything that they learn. They might hear love, the term, and go, how the hell do I place that in any of this? Right? And my response would be, well, you do in every aspect of it, and it can be done. You're just not hearing about it because they don't know how to do that. Okay? It is the world's way. And so you're going to have to find what your ethic is. And you do well to ask if it is aligned with people whose lives have been proven in their behaviors as praiseworthy or good or heroic. And then take that into your quest and do it right off the jump so that you don't have to waste years learning how unfulfilling the other way is, the way of the world. And I'm not trying to sound like a bifurcated, that it is just black and white. But I think it's okay to use that terminology here. What do we mean by the world? We mean the status quo way that things are done on repeat.
Yeah, and the tendencies that drive them towards that.
That's right.
Right.
The hungers, the interests, the disordered internal worlds that aim at that sordid series of apparent gains. And we're all vulnerable to it. But we don't have to live that way. And if we do aspire to that, the guarantee, if we go the way of the world, again, I'll just say, what are those files a reflection of? They're a reflection of everyone who made it to that top. They got to where they were aiming. And their lives are a shambles. Utter ruin, real violence, real murder, real death, pestilence, lust, greed. I mean, it doesn't end. that will occur if you're not choosing something else. So why not choose well from the beginning? Why not start acting upon these things now, wherever you are, whatever stage of
and
life?
one way to think about it, it's actually easier to start there
That's right.
than to be on a
That's
moving
right.
train and have to jump off.
That's right.
Because at some point, Viktor Frankl learns to hold in his dignity, not after he's got this
That's right.
place where he's, a Jewish person in the camp who is peddling cigarettes and compromised already.
That's right.
He holds it from the very beginning. It's much harder and riskier.
You know what? One of my favorite sentences, I haven't thought about this for a long time. One of my favorite sentences in that whole book was, "The best of us never made it out of those camps." He had in mind that the ultimate victors in that whole process were the ones who gave their lives up for their neighbor's good. They were the camp member who gave their last fragment of potato to the younger person or the weaker person to their expense. And I think it needs to be said, and we're in a season, we're in an epoch right now where you can say these things and they're not going to fall as much on deaf ears anymore.
Sure.
Because the evidence of and the cost of not choosing rightly is all around us right now. And I care about people in that space. I want them to be well. And sometimes we have to draw from the wisdom of people who have been in that kind of severity. And they've had the principles proven in them in a way that became them. And they saw what else they could become besides in their captors and in their oppressors. And those two people, if we can think about them, the virtuous man or woman and the unvirtuous tyrant, right? The unholy person is in every one of us. Okay, that was Solzhenitsyn's big revelation. And he was one who experienced camps in the Russian Gulag. And he said, if only it were so convenient that there were just good people and evil people. But this is a thread that runs through all of us. And work is one of the contexts where we prove who we are as much as we discover who we are. And so hopefully there's something in what we're saying today that can at least invite people into different territories of thought that can situate them in front of a better range of options to engage.
Yeah. So if somebody hasn't turned off already because this felt so weighty, maybe we can provide some more sense of hope as it relates to calling. And what is calling, I'm using the term calling and vocation the same.
Interchangeable.
Like voco, being vocal, call. There's, but this idea that you don't have to make your own meaning, right? And that there's I think you love the word, the summons of it into, that there's something that is beckoning to me of a draw to particular things, particular interests, particular needs to express that feels me.
That's right. That is you.
They might be places in which me emerges.
Yes.
If that, so they're not necessarily always me in my sense of it.
Yeah.
But there's also, it's like there is a path, and in the myths of like sprites, like that light up
That's
only
right.
when you get close to them, and like
Yeah,
or this idea of the path emerging as you,
that's right.
eh,
Sometimes it's Gandalf's bridge, and it
right.
won't appear to you if you don't place your foot into the unknown.
Yeah. And, but it is trustworthy.
That's right.
That's, um,
It is, Jason. It
and,
is trustworthy.
and we can talk about like, ooh, the negatives of not following that. I just want to spend some time, like, there is this other thing called calling, vocation, uh, summons that's beckoning us into this place, and that is in everyone's life.
Yes.
So when you think of calling, what what is coming up for you as you've sat with so many people and helped them
Yeah.
find the hidden path that emerges
Yeah.
in those moments?
One way to think about it, it's never good to leave a definition only in its form against another thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be proven as itself. But one way to start is to say it is the alternative to everything we just described as the trouble in the world. Not one of those people is living their calling if they're on that Epstein file list. Okay? They didn't achieve they didn't fulfill their personhood, we could say. And that's a bit of a thought experiment, and it requires some time to turn over in your mind. Are people essentially good? Are they made for good? Right? And the matter is settled in my mind. I'm open to being wrong, but I believe, based on the nature of the God that I also believe in. And when I say believe, I mean have observed to the point that it would be a psychological problem for me to understand otherwise, as I see the world in a candid view of it, and as I experience my life in a candid reflection on it. Love exists in the world, and I do understand it as the highest good, and I do understand it as the nature of God. And so if the nature of God is good, and if God is the source material for the created life that we all live and the beauty that I'm looking out this window at, then that God which created me is incapable of having anything but my best interests in mind, and is simultaneously incapable of doing anything that isn't loving, which means will not override my will in this deal, because love doesn't do that. So what is the mode that God is going to adopt for my sake? Well, what would be a good mode for a parent to adopt? Do we control our children's behaviors endlessly? Do we micromanage them into personhood?
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously
Or
not. Obviously not.
do we place in front of them a range of livable options inside of which they can discern the matter of their own personhood? That's what a good parent does. And comes along when requested, and in the real youth of that child just comes along and aids, you know. And we have the experiences of stepping in when our children are as young as Pierre's are over there. It's not good for you to stick your finger in the light socket, so I'm going to prevent that for you. God probably acts in those ways on our behalf at all times without us being able to, without our perceptive awareness of that. But that's not to say that he's overriding our will. And so vocation, or life calling, comes from this term, vocatio. And vocatio does mean the summons or the call. And phrased that way, it implies something that's perpetual, because God is perpetual and love is never off. Love is not taking a break. Okay? So it's always aligned and oriented to what is good for me. And it always calls me or summons me thenceward in those directions. And the ears and the eyes of the human can be trained upon those matters, can be trained to listen for the voice of calling. And a good litmus test for it is the voice loving? Is it gentle? Is it kind? Is it inspiring? Is it beautiful? Is it humorous? Is it joyous? And if the answer is yes, then it's probably a good thing to explore. And I notice that not one bit of that is summed up in me. It's not just my voice, though it involves my voice. It involves the voice of my soul, which is not always connected to my conscious thought. And we get into some complicated aspects of anthropology there. But if we can just say in plain terms that we all know this voice from within. It's the part of us a lot of times that shows up, our soul, when we act in a way that is morally injurious. The part of us that can't be at rest until we've made it right.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this other voice that speaks to that in us, that comes from without. And it's where we find ourselves being brought thought sometimes. Okay? Or we find ourselves in a serendipitous, seemingly dynamic of beats throughout the day that seemed too aligned as not to merely be coincidence. And we realize we're swimming in grace, and we can actually learn to observe that in a way that is more perpetual and thorough, and we can live there. And that is what Christians mean and what Jesus meant by the kingdom, the range of God's influence in the world. And so we can listen for that. We can train our ears and our hearts to the voice of the caller. And the caller, just like a good parent, isn't interested merely in my compliance. The caller is interested in what's good for me. As a father, I don't want my children to just have one skill, doing what dad says. And what kind of a father would I be in that case? I want my young man at home to be capacitated to go out into the world and bless people with his personhood. And I am trying to call him into reflections, environments, relationships, dynamics that can facilitate that for him. That's what God is up to with us. That's what calling is. Okay? That's what vocation is. When we talk about vocation, we're talking about that. And it's available to everybody because God is always God and people are always people, and that relationship is always that relationship. The God who is love calls to the ones he loves for their sake because it brings him joy, because we're his good idea. When we come with a belly full of that into the question about what good work might be, it's a lot more exciting.
Yeah, or another way to say this, I just want to footnote, some people might have heard the term vocation and think husband, father,
Yes. Yeah,
all those. And those are, you and I are referencing particular vocation to the person.
That's right.
Those are also good senses of vocation that
they are,
that we would agree with.
And we can give some time to that sometime.
Yeah.
There are stations to which we are called that are ontological forms in human life.
And they are identity forming.
They are identity forming and proving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So footnote aside,
Yep.
what I hear you articulating, and you and I have obviously talked about this over the course of our friendship, is God God, in being infinite, wanted to express himself in the world, uh, in creation at large, but in a very particular way in people,
Mm-hmm.
and in unique and unrepeatable ways in each person.
Mm-hmm.
Because being infinite, he can express himself with infinite variation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the me that's here,
Infinite reflections of good.
infinite,
Yeah.
yeah, and made of the same substance,
Yes.
being love,
Yes.
for the same end, being love.
Yes.
So I hear you articulating that. And if we look at people, or if you imagine yourself, if you're listening to this and you imagine yourself as you were made by God, who is love, as a way to express love in the world, and that you have choice in that, whether you choose to express love or say no to that,
Mm-hmm.
and we have choices. And sometimes because of a whole host of reasons, we choose that. We may have been hurt in becoming ourselves.
Yeah.
But despite that, we can still feel a light, a direction of which we can see more clearly. And we can say yes to that.
Mm-hmm.
And the yes to that is when we rule out suspicion and we rule out all those things, and we can trust that, when you say a belly full of,
Mm-hmm.
it's confidence that that is actually good, and
Yeah.
that's love, and that is, it's true, and it is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And that the claim that you are making, and that I agree with, is that our lives are supposed to be quests in that direction. And when they are, meaning, purpose, fulfillment,
Beauty.
beauty,
Yeah.
goodness, and truth
Yes.
all emerge around us, and life becomes profound and full.
That's right.
And so that might feel like a fairy tale when you're considering, I need to find a job like within the next month or week or day in order to put food on the table. But that God is even in those places with us, and still looking for that to be a reality for
That's right.
us.
Yeah, that's why I think the language of quest is so beautiful in this space, because quests take place over a long period of time, right? A quest is, or the language of Odyssey fits just as well. It's the journey of your life. You might as well take it seriously. No, I'm prepared to with you, whomever you are, but not taking it seriously is guaranteed to be a hellscape for you, because you'll be left to the whims of the culture that has already proven to you who and what it is. And it's just going to keep doing that. I promise. I can make that promise. And so we're talking about something that is so far from a fairy tale, actually. It's the realer of the two things. It's just the more seldom attempted of the two things. And that doesn't have to be the way that things remain. And it won't be, That's why we're gathering here today, called to it. A sense that this is better to do than not to do. That's a good thing to start with. That question, is this a better thing to do than to not to do? If the answer is yes, then get to it. And you'll find more meaningful work. You'll find a little more of yourself, and you'll be met there by God, because God is interested in doing with us the things that are meant to be done.
Yeah. I think I'm excited for the rest of, the series that we have going on.
Me too.
I think this is good for today. A lot for people to kind of take in.
Yeah.
And so that feels like a good spot to kind of leave it as a consideration.
Yeah, I agree.
All the places that we went today.
Yeah, I'm thankful for it, Jason. Thanks for a great dialogue. And I think it'll be a fun series.
Cool. For all those listening, we'll catch up with you next time.
Yeah.